All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Crew Show with a little 49er video. One of the great interviews I've seen in a long time. I saw today as John Lynch, Niner general manager, went on the Pat McAfee show with McAfee and his crew. And of course, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. And let's talk a little bit about Lynch with McAfee. I thought it was really good. We're going to play some of it for you. But, I think the first clip I want you guys to hear is John Lynch on what he saw in Brock Purdy. And they asked him about Purdy and the origins of Purdy and this and how the Niners stumbled upon Purdy. Listen to John Lynch talking about the unsung heroes that deserve the credit for Brock Purdy. I mean, he basically starts saying, hey, these are the two people that deserve the credit for Brock.
A lot of the roster stuff, I think, is potentially because you have the cheapest draft pick available contract at the highest priced position. Connor has a question for you.
Yeah, obviously someone who loves the wide receivers, Brock Purdy. And we all know in this room that 2 years ago, you guys had Purdy as the number one player in the draft. You just luckily didn't have to take him till 262. What did you see in Brock, John, when you guys were looking at him and drafting him? And then now, here you are, 2 years later, two NFC championships, one Super Bowl appearance later. What do you see from him now and kind of his growth? And are you mentally prepared for a $500 million check, or how are you going to do that?
Way to set me up for success. But no, you always, I think the people you don't hear about, the unsung heroes, like in these organizations, and that's, to me, it's our scouts, it's our coaches, and I think two people deserve so much credit for Brock Purdy, and one of them now is in our pro department. He's a guy by the name of Steve Slowick. His brother's Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator down there in Houston. But Steve was the college scout that would go through Iowa State, and we thought Brock might come out into the league the year before. We had high grades on him, actually a little higher his junior year than his senior year. But Steve was a guy who had the benefit of going into that school, hearing Matt Campbell, who did such a great job at Iowa State, turning that program around. And Steve would always come during these draft meetings, in the fall meetings, in the draft meetings, and just speak so glowingly about Brock and the culture changer he was, how Iowa State would not be where they're at without Brock Purdy. And Steve was seeing it with his own eyes, but he was also telling us what Matt Campbell was saying. And Matt Campbell had been, there's good recommenders, and Matt had always proven to be a really good recommender. When he believed in a guy, it usually translated. And so Steve was very integral in that process. The other guy I'd say was Brian Greasy. Brian was incredibly impressed once we kind of gave Brian to him and said, hey, get on these Zooms, start talking to Brock. And Greasy came back extremely convicted. And then it's in Kyle's hands, it's in my hands, and we start watching. And we were so smart, we waited till the very last pick to draft him. And thank God he was there. He's been tremendous for our organization. And you really could see it right away. I think he was fourth on our depth chart. And there's a corny saying that people say, about training camp, and like, don't count your reps, make your reps count. And the one thing we saw about Brock, he'd get like 3 or 4 reps a practice when we first started. But man, he didn't come in and just play it safe. He was ripping it in windows that were small and doing so with confidence. That's a hard thing to do, because it's an easy way to get run right out of here when you're the last pick in the draft and you're trying to make these bold plays. But he just played with a confidence, a poise, and you start seeing that. Then it's like Kyle says, well, let's give him 6 reps, and then let's give him 8 and 10. And he just kept kind of doing it over and over and over again. And Trey got hurt, and, he eventually just kept getting better. And then ultimately Jimmy Garoppolo, who had come back, got hurt versus Miami. Brock goes in, and kind of the rest is history.
There you go. John Lynch talking with Pat McAfee. And it's interesting. I mean, the unsung heroes were Steve Slowick, who was a college scout, and Brian Greasy. And those guys deserve the credit. And it's interesting because I think when you're in an endeavor for a long period of time, you get better at it. but you also lose a little bit of that initial enthusiasm. And Brian Griese has been in football his whole life, right? His dad was Bob Griese. And then he played at Michigan, played in the NFL with the Bears and Broncos, and had a whole career. But he is very new to the Niner coaching staff and new to the process of being a quarterback coach and being involved in the scouting situation. He was a TV guy before this. And I just feel like, now Steve Slowick, listening to Lynch tell the story that, that Steve Slowick went into, Ames and Iowa and talked to Iowa State people and figured out that, Brock was a culture changer and that Matt Campbell, I thought it was really interesting listening to Lynch say that Matt Campbell's a good recommender. In other words, everybody's got a track record. You're scouting everybody when you're a scout. You're scouting the people that are giving you the information. What are their biases? How reliable are they? And they had scouted before Brock Purdy, Matt Campbell, and they had decided that when he had recommended guys, that those guys, his recommendations were true and were honest. And that when he really recommended Brock, that was a big thing for them. And the fact that John said that Griese was incredibly convicted in his enthusiasm for Purdy, won over Shanahan and Lynch. I thought that was so interesting because Brian Griese hasn't been doing this that long. And yet he showed a lot of conviction in Brock Purdy. Would he have shown that conviction if he had been doing this for the last 20 years and he knew the odds of a seventh round quarterback being any good, not being, or very, very low? Or would he just be kind of weighed down by the trends and said, well, what are the odds that a seventh round quarterback's any good? Instead, he had this great conviction on Brock Purdy and he shared it with Lynch and Shanahan. It's part of the reason they drafted him. So I thought that was really interesting when you think about Griese in a position for the first time, showing that conviction on Brock Purdy. And it also kind of makes me wonder if Griese was involved in the signing of undrafted free agent quarterback Tanner Mordecai this year, who I'm a big fan of. That's a different story, but I'm really interested to know if Griese, pounded the table for Mordecai in a similar way to the way he pounded the table for Brock Purdy. And then I thought it was interesting when John said you could see it right away in training camp, because I could. I mean, I could see it in mini camp. Now, granted, I didn't like Brock Purdy when he was first drafted. And my buddy who scouts said, hey, man, I am totally convicted that this is a really good football player. Watch this highlight reel. I watched the highlight reel and I started studying him, and I'm like, wow, I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to see the vision of Brock Purdy, that the ball comes out on time and he's accurate, and he's competitive, and he's smart, and he processes what he sees early, pre-snap, and he's a leader, and he's humble. And, there were several great traits there, and I could see it. And once you started seeing the interviews and putting all the pieces together, you realized, you know what, this is a really good prospect. So by the time training camp rolled around, I already had an advantage in that I'd had somebody who's a pro who I trust inherently tell me, hey, you know what, I think this guy's pretty good. And I know my buddy knows what he's talking about. So I did the deep dive, and then I started believing. So by the time I got to training camp, I could see it right away that this guy looked fantastic. He was mastering every drill. He was taking every rep and really making the most of it. And I just thought, I was set. By the time I saw Brock Purdy play his first preseason game and work that play clock down to 2, 1, and 2, I knew he was operating on quarterback 5.0, and I knew that was rare. So now that Brock Purdy has been to a Super Bowl, he's been to multiple NFC championship games, he's going to be paid $50 million. He's one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL by anybody's measurement. Now, to me, it's really interesting to go back to the origins of how the 49ers kind of fell in love with the quarterback. So I thought that was soundbite number 1 that was really interesting. Let's get to soundbite number 2. And this is Lynch talking about the wide receiver room. A lot of questions right now about Ayuk and Debo, and they drafted Ricky Pearsall and they drafted Jacob Cowing. Here's Lynch on his wide receiver room and the additions they've made over the weekend with Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing.
I love our roster. I love the way it's comprised. As I said, we were right there, and we got to find a way to get just a little bit better. And I'm doing everything in my power to keep our roster together. And that's my goal. And I don't question that. I've got so much belief. When you talk about guys like Brandon Ayuk and Debo, they're guys we drafted. They're guys we take a lot of pride in what they've become, who they've become, and we couldn't be more proud of those guys. And so, during the course of drafts and off seasons, do conversations happen? Absolutely, they do. We're past that now. And we're thrilled to add to that group Jawan Jennings, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, Chris Conley, Ronnie Bell, Danny Gray, and now you add Ricky Pearsall, Jake Cowing. I think we made an already strong group even stronger. And part of my job is to think about the now and then to think into the future as well, think out. And so, but we don't do that without thinking, can these guys contribute right away? And we have a vision for both those guys, how they can contribute and be a part. And they represent a lot of the qualities that we like in our players. And they were the best players there for us at the time. And so we're thrilled to add those guys to an already strong room. And we're ready to roll forward. And we've got to find a way, like I said, just to get that much better. And we think we really helped our roster throughout this offseason, free agency, into the draft. And we're fired up about our team.
All right. That was John Lynch saying, I love our roster. It's what I loved about this particular cut is when John's saying, I'm doing everything I can to keep our roster together. He understands that the Niners haven't won the Super Bowl, that he's passionate as hell to get that 6th Super Bowl in the trophy case, that he knows it's really, really difficult to do. And they've gotten really, really, really close. And he doesn't want to tear this thing down. He wants to keep it together. And I admire that because he senses how close they are. And it took a lot to get to this point, and the last thing they want to do is tear it down. So they don't want to move Debo. They don't want to move Ayuk. They want to keep these guys. And then he said, we added Ricky Pearsall. We added Jacob Cowing to our group of weapons, and we're fired up about our team. And that makes me fired up about their team. Just the fact that, Pearsall's a really dangerous weapon in the middle of the field. Cowing's a vertical threat and another guy who should be able to give this offense an element of speed with this 4-3 running ability to really add to their wide receiver core. And I just think it's interesting. I think, to me, this kind of puts the whole Ayuk-Debo trade thing to rest because, they considered all their options. They thought about it, but it sounds like John Lynch is intent on getting that 6th ring and keeping the whole group together. And do you have a better chance to win this year with Ayuk than without him? Of course. Do you have a better chance to win the Super Bowl this year with Debo? Of course. But now you've added Pearsall and Cowing and a stronger Brock Purdy, and you've bolstered your team. And he says, I love our roster, and I love the way it's comprised, and I love, how it's going. So I thought that was really cool. That was, to me, one of the, really interesting highlights of his sit down with McAfee. Let's get to number 3. I think number 3 is really interesting as well. This was kind of the origins of how John Lynch, who was a Hall of Fame football player and a great announcer, wanted to be a general manager. And this was some of the things I really didn't know about John. If you think about, he says, I didn't know I'd be good at this. And he tells kind of the story of how he had, how he kind of came upon this. And I think it played to most football people. Like, John Lynch is smart. He went to Stanford. He won a Super Bowl. He had a Hall of Fame career. Then he went to the booth. And then it's like he just got this inkling that he'd like to be in charge of a team. But really, the origins of his interest in being an executive go way, way back. And if you think about what he's already done in a short amount of time, he's won the, as he's the president of football operations. He was the Pro Football Writers Association Executive of the Year in 2019. He's had 2 Super Bowl appearances, 3 NFC West division titles, 4 10-win seasons. He's already quite accomplished as an executive in a short amount of time. But the story of how John Lynch became the GM of the Niners is so interesting. And let's hear that right now. He says, I didn't know I'd be good at this. Let's hear him tell that story.
So 2 Ring of Honors, obviously, Tampa and Denver do the whole thing. Then you're a Super Bowl champion. This is absurd. Just this in of itself is absurd as a player. Whenever you get into the GM role, Okay. And we all know guys that are in locker rooms that are going to be like a coach or front office personnel. And I think a lot of people normally doubt. I'm like, nah, that guy. Okay, we get it. You're going to be a great coach. For you, did you know you would be good in front office? Did you know that you'd be a great businessman? Because that's what you have to do in your position right now. And now you're the president of football ops as well. It's like, did you know that this was going to be something you would succeed at? Did you go in just like kind of blank slate? How'd you get into this? And did you predict this to yourself whenever you took the gig?
Yeah, I didn't know I'd be good at it. I didn't even know I'd be doing it. You know, it's an interesting story as to how I ended up here. I ask myself that often, but you know, I think the thing that probably, you know, way back when I was a kid, I did love like the NFL draft. My dad used to pull me out of school, out of St. James Catholic School. So, you know, it's back when it started on Thursday, and at half day he'd come pick me up at lunch. We'd go watch the draft. So I loved that. Throughout my career, I'd piss my wife off by not only watching round 1 through 3, but then watching round 7. And I'm filling out sheets and doing all that. And she's going, really? I'm like, come on now. We've got better stuff to do. So I've always had an interest like that. But I think the thing that probably piqued my interest, I was living in Denver after I got done playing there and had become friendly with Elway. We played some golf together, and he looked out for me. We had the same high school coach. We went to Stanford, played football, baseball. Same fraternity. That was like the poster on my wall. But Elway took the leap at the Broncos, and in his first year, you know, he asked me. He said, "Johnny, you know, I'm keeping a lot of the scouts, but I don't know them. And I love the way you think about football. Could you watch the safeties this year and write some reports?" And so I did that for him. And I remember it was the year of like Mark Barron and Harrison Smith, and I took a lot of pride in. I had no idea how scouts did things, but I just watched it like I would watch film. And I sat there at the computer and wrote some reports. And Elway was blown away with like the detail. You know, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it right. The next year, he says, you know, that was awesome, Johnny. Why don't you do the DBs? So I did the entire DBs. I added the corners. The next year, he invites me in for their draft process. And this was all like, you know, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of time. I went to Indy. I went to the combine with the Broncos that year. And so that started piquing my interest. And, you know, long after that, there was a guy who ended up bidding for the Carolina Panthers, and he didn't get the team. Tepper got it, but there was another gentleman by the name of Ben Navarro, and I worked with his brother at Fox, and he one time asked if he could meet with me, and out of the blue asked me if I would run his team if he got the Panthers. And I said, really? Are you serious? And he asked me to kind of put together a vision statement for how I would run a team, and so I spent a couple weeks doing that. I met with him. And from that point forward, I kind of just said, you know, if the right scenario ever came about, you know, this might be something I want to do. I love the folks at NFL on Fox. I was working with Kevin Burkhardt, who's now at the top, and so happy for that dude. He's going to be working with Brady this year.
So there you have John Lynch telling a story how he wrote reports on safeties for John Elway, and that he was so detailed with it that Elway asked him to then write reports on all the DBs. And you know, he was obsessed on the draft, and he's making notes on the 7th round of the draft when he wasn't really involved with it. And his wife's like, do we really need to be doing this? It just kind of shows that he's got a deep passion for personnel evaluation, and how he went with his dad to the draft, and how the guy at Fox, you know, was related, and that was part of his journey as well. And it just kind of shows how the GM idea was born out in John. And it wasn't just like I think it plays to a lot of people like, hey, you know what? He was at Fox. He had a good gig, but then all of a sudden Shanahan was his buddy, and he just decided right there, I want to be a GM. But no, it was way before that. And he had been preparing to be an executive for years and years. And it was an itch that he wanted to scratch, you know, and it was a goal of his. And so to me, if I had known that early on, I think that would have added to his credibility as a general manager, despite the fact he had no experience. And I think it's really cool that he came out and said, I didn't know I'd be any good at this. And I think in a short amount of time, he's proven. You know, he hired Adam Peters, he hired Martin Mayhew, he hired guys that had experience, and surrounded himself with really good people. And, you know, the fact is he knows football, and he's a leader, and he's a smart guy, and he's getting it done. So I thought that was really interesting. And the fourth and final one we're going to use here, here's Lynch saying, that he was missing the competition. He was in the broadcast world. He's probably making great money. He's living in San Diego, probably got a beautiful family and a wonderful house and all kinds of money. And you're living in San Diego, California. And instead of just, going to the beach and hanging out and, enjoying life and this and that, he had this other endeavor he wanted to pursue. And that was being a general manager. And he said he missed the competition. He missed the scoreboard. Let's hear that quote right now. Let's hear John with McAfee talking a little bit about this.
I was missing like competition. I was missing scoreboard. I was missing the wins, the losses, all of that. And then, it out of nowhere, something was keeping me up at night one year. And I didn't even know what it was. And my wife said, something's on your mind. I know you when you're acting like this, you can't sleep. And I had done a bunch of Falcon games that year, and Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. It's the year they went to the Super Bowl against the Patriots. And, I heard something like Kyle Shanahan's going to get this Niners job, and that's the one he wants. But somebody said he's struggling to find a GM he wants to work with. And so something was on my mind. I had done a bunch of Kyle's games that year, and I gave him a cold call. And I just said, hey, dude, I want to thank you for all the time you've given me all year in these production meetings. I heard something that you're struggling to find a GM. And he goes, I am, man. It's killing me. I think I am going to take that Niners job. And he goes, why are you asking? I said, well, consider me, I don't even know if I do it, but, just think about that and see what you think. And his first question, he's like, dude, why would you do that? You got a great job. You got a great life. Like, why would you even consider doing that? And I said, you go play your games. He did. He called back and he said, man, I can't stop thinking about what you said to me. Would you do that? And I want you to come meet this dude named Jed. Well, that dude named Jed was our owner here, Jed York. Came and met Jed. We flew cross country to Atlanta. I was offered the job on that flight. We meet with Kyle and the whole thing's wrapped up. I hadn't even talked to my wife or family yet. It all moved kind of fast, and here we are 8 years later. So sorry for the long story.
No. I'm hoping we get 3 or 4 more of those. That was phenomenal. Hey, thank you for blessing us with that information. And also, shout out to you being somebody taking initiative and being like, you know what? Yeah, this is something I want, and diving right in and being prepared and knowing that you're prepared.
So there you go. Lynch told the story of how he, approached Kyle Shanahan about the GM job, that he cold called Kyle, and obviously they had a relationship because John and him had talked, and John of course played in Denver, and Kyle, obviously they had a relationship going before he worked at Fox, but then he had done all of his games at Fox and had heard that Kyle didn't have a general manager in place, and saw the kind of the handwriting on the wall that the Niners were going to be looking for a coach, and that Kyle was going to get consideration, and that, he just said to Kyle, hey, maybe consider me. I don't even know if I want the job, but would you consider me for it? And then Kyle came back and was like, why? Why would you do this? Why would you just sign up for something where we're working 100-hour weeks and you're away from your family? But John had goals. John had goals he wanted to achieve, and John had wanted to do this job for a while. And then I just think it's interesting how John tells the story, how Jed offered him the job on a flight to Atlanta, probably to see Kyle. And, he gets offered the general manager's job, and he hadn't even talked to his wife yet. And I mean, the difference in commitment is just off the charts. I mean, I did quality control in the Canadian League, and I showed up at 5 a.m. every morning and was there till midnight. And that was quality control in the Canadian League. And it was a glimpse for me into how hard football people really work. And when you're doing a media job and you're flying in, you're doing a couple interviews, then you're broadcasting the game, then you're going home, the commitment is so much less, and the money is probably better or almost as good or nearly as good. It's in the same neighborhood. You're making probably $1 million or something like that, $500,000 being a Fox broadcaster, and you're probably making, maybe $3 million, couple $1 million being an executive. But for the Fox job, you're flying in, you're spending tons of time with your family. You got your week free, win or lose. You're on to the next game. And he signed up for a job that's so much more demanding as far as time and effort and being all in. And but I think I kind of admire John for that, to be honest. And the fact that Jed offered him the job on the flight to Atlanta, and now he's got a general manager's job offer. And now you got to go back to your wife and be like, honey, I'm never going to be home. You know, I know I'm doing well and I enjoy you and the kids and our life, but I want to sign up for something that's going to be all encompassing and take me out of San Diego and put me in Northern California. And it just kind of shows that, I don't know, it shows maybe that John's wife is all about his journey as well and admires the fact that, he's got a dream and he's living his dream. And I think that's really cool. But there's a trade-off. Families pay the price in pro sports, especially in football, where these guys work endless hours, coaches, executives. I mean, if you sign up for it, you're all in, and there is, everything else comes second. And that's just kind of the way it is. And to me, that was really interesting to hear how, we heard how the dream was born out as far as John wanting to be a GM, but then we got to hear the exact how he actually connected with Kyle and how that conversation went and how the whole thing went with Jed. And then just the idea that you could commit yourself potentially to, a 100-hour-a-week career when you're working normally a 20-hour-a-week career. And your wife, went for it, and your family said, okay. And I don't know, to me, it's really cool. And it shows how all in. So these people are like, if you don't think Kyle and John are all in, there is no such thing as partway in. If you're going to commit to this, you have to be all in. And that's 100-hour weeks. And the passion that John Lynch has to put that 6th Lombardi in the Niner trophy case really, to me, was illustrated in this sit down with McAfee. And it makes me admire him an awful lot, but it also makes me feel good that the people that are running the team that I'm rooting for, they're absolutely living and dying about getting that 6th Lombardi. And I hope they get it. Anyway, great stuff. Great stuff. If you get a chance, go watch all of John Lynch with Pat McAfee. McAfee's got the best show on TV right now. He had Howie Roseman on as well, who's incredible, the executive of the Eagles. But some of those moments with John Lynch were phenomenal. All right, our video today is brought to you by our sponsor, Aura. And now a word from our sponsor, Aura. Have you ever typed your name on the internet and seen all of your private information is online? Are you tired of receiving tons of spam calls from random numbers? Are you receiving more and more of these as time has gone on? Well, that's where Aura, the sponsor of today's show, can really help you out. Data brokers sell your information to scammers and spammers and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, your email, your home address, all your records, your health records, who your relatives are. It's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it also protects me from hackers who could use the information to help them access my social media accounts, my bank accounts, or any other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats I can't see. I get other features like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without having to download several different apps. It's really easy to set up. And best of all, I get everything at one affordable price. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to the link in the description to start your 2-week free trial. All right, thanks to Aura for sponsoring the Krug Show. Thanks to all of you guys for supporting the channel, supporting the Krug Show. We're loving doing it. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor. And once again, have a great day. Thanks for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.